My name is Marty Kaplan. I'm Associate Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication, and I'm also Director of the Norman Lear Center, and I want to welcome you all here today. And looking around, in case you were not told this before you left home, you look fabulous. This is conceivably the best looking crowd we have ever had here. I'm going to be your Sherpa today. I'm going to try to keep trains moving and tell you where the restrooms are, which is right outside, and to hustle you in and out, and occasionally actually talk about the topic of the day. For those of you who don't know, the Norman Lear Center's idea is that entertainment is one of the most important cultural forces on the face of the earth. And by entertainment, we don't only mean things like the stuff Hollywood produces or the music industry produces. We also mean realms that have been taken over in many ways by entertainment, like politics, like journalism. One could argue that modern architecture or education or religion, all these have been shaped by the needs to grab and hold attention and to market and to get audiences invested in what they do. And that is a force for good sometimes and a force for not so good sometimes. And at the Lear Center, we study that. And it's our hope that by looking at the same time at things that are normally not looked at together, that new insights can follow and sparks can fly. Today, we are going to be looking at the way in which traditional Hollywood stuff and traditional entertainment stuff like movies and music, how that looks when you take the world of fashion and bring it in. Creativity is a topic of interest for us. We've held conferences about it before, looking at movies and music. Now today, we're going to add fashion to that mix and see what happens. Where does creativity come from? Who owns it? What happens to it once it's out there in the world? Those are our topics. At the Lear Center, we have a tradition at our events, which is that rather than waiting for those breathless last few moments to thank all the people who worked tirelessly to put these events together, we start with those thank yous. And so the people that I'm going to ask you to thank, and hold your applause till I've been through it, are people who have in some ways already performed, in other ways are performing all day long. And trust me, they will do a great job, and so they will deserve your thanks. Let me start, and again, wait till I get to the end, with the Annenberg School, which is the auspice under which the Lear Center operates. Lynn and Norman Lear, who are generous patrons of the Lear Center, and in honor of their generosity, the center was named after them. The Center for the Public Domain, which is the sponsor and funder of this conference, are partners at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, which will from now on be known as FIDM through the day. Barbara Bundy, Natalie Holtzman, Kevin Jones, Shirley Wilson, and Steve Reeves. People on the Lear Center staff: Michelle Raphael, Katie Borum, Johanna Blakely, Scott McGibbon, Adam Seaton, Clemente Ladrido. Members of the Annenberg School Support and Facilities team: Becky, Giovanna, Patricia, Jeff, Jim, Rad. People who have been working to put on the production elements of today: Alan and Denise and Kevin. Two other people I'll come back to in a moment: David Bollier and Lori Racine, senior fellows of the Lear Center. And of course, my agent, manager, publicist, stylist, children, and the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. So please join me in thanking them all. I trust by now you have turned your cell phones off. If that makes you fidgety, then have some caffeine. Maybe it'll have a paradoxical effect. This event is being both filmed and webcast, so there are cameras of all sorts all around. If you can please try to stay in your seats during the time you're supposed to be in your seats. I bet you'll know what they are. And now I want to circle back to talk about David Bollier and Laurie Racine. My contribution on the sort of substantive front was adding fashion to the mix as we talk about creativity. I wanted to see what would happen when you added a completely different realm where similar issues arise. But from then on, the intellectual heavy lifting and the mounting of this event was something spearheaded by the two directors of our project in this area. It's called Creativity, Commerce, and Culture, and David Bollier and Laurie Racine are the senior fellows who run that project. You'll meet Laurie in a few minutes. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you and pass the baton to David Bollier. David's most recent book is called Brand Name Bullies: The Quest to Own and Control Culture. So if you wonder where he stands on some of these issues, there's a subtle hint in its title. He was instrumental in our previous conference on this topic called Artists, Technology, and the Ownership of Creative Content. We're extremely fortunate to have him with us, and he is now going to describe the day we're going to have. David.
Thank you, Marty. Well, since a lot of today is about creative derivation and homage, I'd like to acknowledge at the outset my debt to Norman Lear, who, of course, is a master at convening widely diverse and eclectic groups of people to have some thoughtful dialogues and a lot of fun at the same time. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Just so you know, we have a lot of noted fashion designers and experts from the world of fashion. We have our partners at FITM. We have many members from the USC community. We have entertainers and lawyers and musicians and academics. We have TV producers and digital technology experts. So I think we're going to have some fascinating talks among such a diverse crowd. Let me stress that we see this event and this discussion as a grand experiment. It's the beginning of a new conversation, perhaps, about the nature of creativity and the different ways that creativity can be packaged as it's brought to market. My colleague Laurie Racine and I have been fascinated by this topic for some time, and how the framework of creativity in fashion is so radically different from that of other creative sectors, particularly film and music. And yet, at the same time, we're fascinated at how the ecology of creativity in fashion is so remarkably akin or similar to that in many digital communities, where appropriation and derivation and sharing and transformation is an utterly normal practice. So our hypothesis for today's conference is that the open white space of borrowing that fashion acknowledges and indeed celebrates has a lot to do with its creative vitality and economic success, because fashion seems to draw its life's breath from having access to a creative and cultural commons, a shared pool of artistic designs and motifs and icons and cultural references that are constantly changing and churning in all sorts of novel, unpredictable ways. At a time when the value and efficacy of intellectual property is a much debated issue, we think that it's worthwhile exploring what secrets fashion may hold for these other creative sectors. There's a French term called bricolage that's been used to describe this recombinant creative process in fashion, where everything gets mixed and morphed and incongruous elements get synthesized into something new, Well, bricolage seems to be a primary dynamic of fashion, which leads us to wonder, what can we learn philosophically, strategically, about the bricolage that lies at the heart of fashion? So we start this exploration with a keynote address by David Wolf, who's the creative director of the Doniger Group. Mr. Wolf is the man who makes it his business to know what you're going to be wearing next year. He analyzes the trends that influence the apparel and accessories markets, as well as all sorts of big picture cultural developments that affect what the look's going to be next year and how it's going to evolve, and what this means for the fashion industry, both aesthetically as well as commercially. Mr. Wolf is going to talk about the fragile creative ecosystem of fashion and how it defines what's original and what's derivative, or more to the point, how imitation is an important intrinsic element of fashion and the business. So Mr. Wolf is supremely qualified to help us make sense of the big picture themes of this conference, and it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce him now, Mr. David Wolf.